Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Kirsten Swartz, the Manager of Education and Community Engagement Programs at Brattleboro Museum and Art Center. It's my pleasure to be your host for tonight's artist and curator conversation with Erick Johnson and Mara Williams, followed by a Q&A with all of you. Admission for this program is pay as you wish. If you would like to donate to Brattleboro Museum and Art Center to support this and future arts programs, you can do so at brattleboromuseum.org/support. You'll also find information about membership on that page as well. This event is being presented in connection with Erick Johnson's exhibit Double Take, which was curated by Mara Williams and is on view through October 11th in the Mary Summer Room at BMAC. In tonight's program, Mara will lead a conversation with Erick, and we will show images of his work and the virtual tour of the exhibit while they talk. You are welcome to ask questions at any time, and we will save time at the end for Erick and Mara to answer them. So in just a moment, I'm going to ask Mara and Erick to join me on screen. The plan is that they will chat for around 50 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to your questions and comments. To submit a question or comment, if you're here via Zoom, please use the Q&A button on your screen. You can do that at any time, and we'll get to them at the end of the talk. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you can type your questions or comments there, and we'll keep an eye on that as well. All right, with that housekeeping taken care of, I'd like to ask Mara and Erick to turn on their cameras and mics now. Mara and Erick, thank you for being here tonight. It's great to see you. Mara, I'll turn it over to you now.
Terrific. I have no idea how many people are out there in Zoom land. And I'm a much better public speaker than I am with no audience response coming back to me at all, and no eyes to look at, and not being in front of paintings or sculpture or whatever the medium is that I'm working with currently. So this has been a brave new world for me this last year. And I never quite feel like I'm on my mark in this particular frame of reference. But I am delighted to have my friend and colleague and a wonderful artist, Erick Johnson, joining us here. Erick currently lives in New York City with his wife and his 16-year-old daughter. But he's a native San Franciscan, and I only know two native San Franciscans, like real San Franciscans in my life, although I have met Erick's sister recently, so I suppose I now know three. He's a New York-based artist. He also does photography, as you'll see from this show, if you haven't seen the show already, and he's acted as a curator in recent years. He has shown nationally and internationally, and he's had recent solo shows in DC, Washington, DC, as well as the IUCAD Art Center in Columbus, Indiana. He recently co-curated Double Vision, as opposed to our show Double Take, a show about photography and art making practices that was at the Lab Space in Hillsdale, New York. That was in 17, I believe. And then in the Hudson Valley Community College and Teaching Gallery up in Troy, they enjoyed his work this past year in 2019. I've got the decades mixed up at this point. He studied at the School of Visual Arts and then earned a BFA from Empire State College, and he is an MFA from the Milton Avery Graduate School for Arts at Bard College. Bard, which in the course of my lifetime has become an extraordinary training institution, not only for artists, but curators as well. He is represented by Neptune Fine Art in Washington, DC, and Catherine Merkel Gallery in New York City, and his work is in a number of private collections. So welcome, Erick. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I am going to ask my colleagues behind the scenes with their magic to actually, one of the most exciting things to come and happen in the middle of the pandemic is we joined the program Easel, which does 3D tours for museums and art galleries. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, if you have an internet connection, you can come to each of the galleries of the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center in each rotation and push a button and in 3D be in the space, and then you can pull up different parts and see the labels that we have, or see, you know, high resolution photographs of the work that's on the walls as you're coming through this 3D process. So I'm going to ask that we bring and start our tour, and that you can run the tour like with the push of a button, and it brings you through our galleries. So in this room, the challenge I gave Erick was to make his artwork and his Instagram feed speak to each other in a meaningful way. So he has 4 large paintings on either side of the long walls of the hallway. And then he has a long band along the back wall from the entrance. And then as you turn around, there's this little coda to the show, an intimate painting that you can fall into as you leave the gallery. And so this is how all the different 3D aspects work. And given how locked up and locked down we've been for the past year, I find this a very exciting development in the life of a regional community-based museum, to be able to get the exciting work that we've been doing for close to 50 years now out to a broader public. We had our first review in the Brooklyn Rail, which is a banner day for me, because the Brooklyn Rail is one of the art critical sources in New York City that I most admire. And Hovey Brock did us the honor of actually coming up to the show, coming in, spending time with Erick's work, and he wrote just really a wonderful, insightful review. It appeared in the it was the July-August 2021 Brooklyn Rail. So if you were to Google Brooklyn Rail, Erick Johnson double take, or Hovey Brock, you would find this review. It's much more extensive than I could read on the air tonight. But he makes this wonderful point, and it's the point at which I want to start with Erick. Johnson is above all a colorist, and the way he bends the hues of his glazed tints, like the notes in a blues guitar solo shows mastery. The abundance of complex color transparencies in the paintings, the formal invention in his photographs, and the conversation that takes place between the two make Double Take a generous offering indeed. He then goes on to some really beautiful color and spatial analysis of the work, and I recommend everybody get a subscription to the Brooklyn Rail and start reading it regularly. So this is where I want to bring Erick into the conversation. I'd like to just start, before we start about the structure of the paintings, I'd just like to start with the color. Because these are jeweled tones. When you walk right up to them, there's a transparency and a density at the same moment. And each pool of color, each of these polygons, these gem-like shapes, have a gem-like glowing interior. And I'd like you to talk about how you build that and what you're after in doing that.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Maura, for the impetus for the show and the opportunity to do that. And I also want to just quickly thank the museum staff, all the way from Danny at the top all the way down. It's just been a great experience working with everybody. So thank you for all the help and support. I've always been involved with color. I've always loved color. You know, growing up in Southern California when I was younger, I think I just got imprinted with that sense of color. The way I'm using color in this work, I conceived of these 4 paintings for this particular room. And then the smaller one, the 5th one, was an extra that we had room to fit into in that one wall. But I've been using for the last, I want to say 2 or 3 years, just pure pigment without any white, black, or gray. So it's just the absolute clean colors coming out of the tubes. And I do thin them down. I use a medium. different pigments handle in different ways. So I'm careful about, how they lay down on the surface, how they overlap, how they build up. So, but it's it's a process of basically using the oil paint like watercolor, so that it's transparent color, and then putting that down on a very bright white gessoed surface, which with oil paint's luminosity, you're going to get light bouncing through the color and hitting the gessoed surface and coming back out again. So there's, I'm exploiting the luminosity that's inherent in thin down but pure oil paint.
Okay, and
does that make sense?
It makes sense. So you're working it's clear that you're working thin, and that then allows you to keep building up. But
Yeah.
in working thin, even if it's just coming out of the tube, you're using more than one color on each of those patches to build your color.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Because I can see that when I'm going to ask to go into the white spaces in a bit. And so like, what are the tools of your trade? It's a thin layer, it dries completely, you go on to another thin layer, there are striations in some, there's stippling in others. Like, what are the tools of the trade to get that incredibly delicate veining structure, as well as depth of color?
Well, I was, the first thing to say is just that I had been using very flat opaque color for a long time in different bodies of work, but I just came to really appreciating this thinner, more transparent color. And when I started doing that, I started working with different color combinations. So each shape, each polygon can be 2, 3, 4 or more variations on the color. And to keep that from just being a blended color, I was using tools like scrapers and squeegees and boards and towels and rags and paper towels, and dragging it across the surface, because I was also in the process of eliminating brush marks, and I'd gotten to a point where I just wanted something that was a little bit that took, my hand was still there in terms of the movement of these striations, but it wasn't about the brush anymore. The way the striations happen is there's a random element to it. It's not completely controllable. So there's definitely some surprises that happen, and occasionally, I have to, mistakes happen, and I have to go back and wipe it out or start over, or even paint it over sometimes. It's the fun part for me, because it's slow and it's meditative, and I build the colors up slowly, and it becomes a dialogue with all the different elements in the painting, and I get obsessed with balancing the different combinations.
Now, if it's possible, Kristen, to pull up a close-up of one of the large paintings. And now if we can zoom into some of the perfect, totally perfect, exactly what I want. I'm always fascinated with edges in paintings. When I look at a painting, I often bend my knees and drop down, and I'm looking at how things have dripped along the lower edge, and then I look to the side of a painting and I want to see how things have dripped. But that these like bright shards of, if this were stained glass windows, those empty spots that somehow they came together and then they didn't fit together all the time, animate this picture with this jazzy sort of syncopation between these color spaces. But it also lets you just really focus on, like, I'm going into the tree now. Maybe you've noticed I'm moving closer and closer. Because here I'm trying to point myself to the places where there's a little bit of bleed, there's an edge where you see there was what color may have been put on first, or how the color's pooling. And despite how delicately you paint, there's and without that kind of gesture, the impasto or the brush strokes of your big slashing brush strokes and big buildups of paint, there's an energy and a pulsing that is happening across this canvas in so many different ways, and I find that very exciting. Do you want to talk about how you sort of maintain an all-over energy and then have these quiet moments within the painting? How you're working or how you're thinking about building that up?
Sure. Well, then the in that painting, you can see each polygon has its own kind of vibration, its own character, and again, that's just another way for me to look for differences or correspondences between these different colors and then the application. So it becomes rhythmic and becomes it's. I mean, I came to geometric painting a little bit late. I had been making gestural paintings for quite a while, and gradually I became, I got closer and closer to a geometric sort of structure to the work, and I feel like it's been really good for the way I work with color to have that structure there. But I wasn't, I wasn't a hardcore geometric painter, so I'm kind of improvising the way I do it. And I so when it comes to the edges, I use different tapes. I mean, there's a whole variety of tapes you can use. Some are will give you that absolute clean, sharp edge, and then others will, bleed a little bit or not be perfect. And so I kind of embrace that imperfection and hopefully lean into that as much as I can. And the rhythms inside are just from moving my tools at a certain pace, or slowing up, shifting. I mean, there's a lot of I don't know, sort of intonation that goes into how the paint gets laid out, and I love that because it's it's surprising, and it creates complicated patterns and rhythms. So I think
Go ahead, finish. Sorry.
I just think in musical terms. I think I'm a frustrated musician on some level. So.
Well, I have to say, both in my looking at your paintings and its sort of rhythm and syncopations and intonation, I would say, and then Hovey brought it up about being a blues guitarist, that mastery that you have. I was wondering if you were a musician, not that you're a professional musician, but did you play the piano or the guitar as a kid?
Oh, I was a terrible musician. The band leader in my elementary school was a trumpet player, so he got all the boys together, and he said, "You're a trumpet player. You're a trumpet player. You're a trumpet." And I wanted to play drums or guitar, and then so I was just an awful trumpet player, just making terrible bleeding sounds, and when at some point I got braces, and I thought, I'm out of this, I can't play the trumpet with braces. I'm finished, and I went to him. I said, "Mr. Giardino, look, I have braces. I can't play trumpet anymore." He said, I got a solution. You're going to play the baritone, which has a big mouthpiece that'll go right around your braces." And my buddy had the same problem. He ended up playing the tuba, and so we were terrible. And I just, I was in mortal fear of being called out to play a solo and all that. But I love music, and I think in musical terms, even though it's visual. So like the different colors become like a chord, a guitar chord that is could be different strings, different fingerings. Creates a complicated sound. So that's important.
So if you had to sum up one of your paintings in terms of its resonance for you, both as a maker, but also as a viewer. Have you thought about what you really think the focus of your paintings are? You know, what the resonance is, what the afterglow is?
Yeah, well, I mean, I realized that, you know, I'm all about balance, you know, so for me, a lot of what I do is balancing different elements. And, you know, I make a distinction between, you know, what I would call dynamic balance versus static balance. You know, static balance is where nothing's moving, nothing's in play. Dynamic balance is, you know, kind of like a pendulum swinging back and forth. So I'm always involved with moving in some way. There's a lot of movement in the paintings. There's evidence of my body, my arm, my hands, you know, and it's also, there's an ephemeral quality to it. There's you know, there's a kind of light, a quality of light in the work that is, you know, I mean, I think about stained glass windows. I think of that history. I think of, you know, Middle Eastern geometric tiling. There's, you know, pre-Columbian textiles, Inca stone walls, like all these things are just absolutely compelling to me. And so I don't specifically go out of my way to reference those things, but they're definitely in the back of my mind, and they're definitely, you know, they animate the work in my imagination for sure.
Well, I would say as a viewer, I sense all of those things. There is a textile quality, there is a ceramic quality, there is definitely a musical quality. There's the stained glass is, I think, the most straightforward quality that comes in.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, and there's the history of geometric painting that you know falls into our viewing when we have a catalog of images that we have seen over the course of our viewing experience. So the second part of the show, I mean, this is really meant to be an installation where there's point counterpoint between the paintings and between these images that you do. I met you and started following you. Your wife is a ceramicist, and I have a thing for clay, and so I was following her, and then I followed you, and then all of a sudden I noticed these aren't paintings. This is street photography. I got on Instagram late. You know, it was around for probably 10 years before someone said to me, "But Mara, you're a curator." Everybody, I think it was Richard Jacobs, which is out there tonight. Mara, every artist is on Instagram. That's how you meet each other. That's how you get to see what everybody's doing out there. You know, you won't have to make so many trips all over New England and up and down to New York if you just put Instagram on your phone. So that's when I started following. First, I started with artists I knew. Then I was like, oh, they're following this person, and that's pretty interesting. And then I followed this person. And now I spend way too many hours a day on Instagram just looking for images. But I did notice that you were posting an awful lot of really great street photography. And although it's not analogous to your painting, there was a you know, a quality of a sort of chaos and entropy to every picture you took. And in some ways, your paintings, because each of these polygons is on a little ledge hitting another one, and so they're trying to reach equilibrium. And because they're stacked, they're static, but because they're not perfectly stacked, there's that sense of impending chaos in your work. And I was finding that there was just this really interesting resonance between your two bodies of work. So wanted to talk about your Instagram feed.
Sure. Well, you know, I've always been interested in photography, documenting my world. It's the Instagram work. I don't know. It's about 7 or 8 years worth of work, and to me, it's a visual diary, but it's also a kind of practice, if you will, of going out. I mean, the way I thought about it was that I was usually not in the studio and I was doing something, mundane, which could be walking our dog or running an errand or, getting from one place to the other. And fortunately, in New York City, it's such a visually rich environment that, there's always something that catches your eye, if you go slow enough. I realized that if you're rushing too fast, you'll never see anything except, just blurs. So you have to slow down. You've got to get on the right sort of wavelength to see different things. And then initially I was shooting with a little point and shoot camera, and then smartphones started to get better, and everybody had a smartphone at one point, and then the cameras now are actually really good. But I would, for 2 years, for instance, I went out and I posted a photo every day. Once a day I would have something to, so it was kind of a personal challenge. And I don't do that now, but I don't, I'm a little more selective, I guess, or I've run, I like going to new places now because I think I've kind of worn out some of my haunts. I've photographed everything, but I did, to speak to your point, I realized at some point the way something was framed created the image, and that it was a conundrum in my mind because I thought, well, it's not really there as a photograph or as an image until I was framing it and seeing it, finding it, framing it. And then I started to see these correspondences or relationships to the frame, how it was framed, how things got close to the frame. And of course, that's a lot closer to my painting practice, where, the edge of my frame is incredibly important. And I think the other thing I think about is that idea of entropy, where New York City is just this living organism where everything is getting slowly or quickly replaced, and I started off really doing a lot of photography in Chelsea before the High Line was built, and before all the, there were a couple galleries there, but there really wasn't anything going on. And there were all these old buildings, all these old taxi repair shops and warehouses, and just funky, just a lot of visual, funkiness, like rusty, bent, painted, burned out things that looked, to my eye, they just were really interesting. And then I thought, okay, these could be paintings. So I tended to focus on more or less 2D facades and objects, which is just what my particular interest was. And then, the more you do something, the more you want to do it. And so I became a hawk. Whenever I would go out, I'd be kind of very alert to whatever I was seeing. So.
Great. And then you did 2 exhibitions with a colleague. Tell me about your curatorial experience.
So my colleague Janice Caswell is a wonderful artist, and she's also incredibly active on Instagram with street photography. And we had known each other because we had shown together a little bit, but then we didn't really know each other as doing photography per se, And then, but I started noticing her, and she started noticing me, and we got together and started talking about it, and we realized we had a unique focus when we went out, but it had this relationship to our studio practice, and we sort of percolated on that for a while, and then started talking about, well, maybe we know some other people that are other artists who are doing this too, and started coming up with lists of people, and they could be all over the country. They weren't just New York based. And then the idea for a show came about. And the idea was to combine their actual studio production, whatever they were making, paintings, photographs, sculpture, and then choose some photographs that they had posted on Instagram that had, more or less a high relevance to what they were doing in the studio. And we thought that'd be an interesting show. So we did two versions of that show.
Great. Well, I think you and I put it's your show. We put it together slightly differently in that it wasn't, okay, here's a painting and then here's one of the images that relates to that painting. The Mary Summer Room, which is the gallery at the Brattleboro Museum that you're in, we try to, it's not exclusive, but we try to make that a little laboratory for people to experiment in, whether it's a site-specific piece that's woven to come to those walls at that height, or whether it's a little experimental show. But we like it to be trend towards environmental. Like, you're coming into this space, you need to think of it as a whole space, not just a place to put 5 paintings or 7 paintings, because that's the series that you just did. And so I asked you to think about this as, like, how would you show your artwork and your Instagram work together in the same time and space? And then I left it up to you, and I was thinking, God, what is he going to ask me for tech for this thing? How many little cameras am I going to have? What's going to scroll? I'm thinking, oh my God, it's going to da, 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 da. And you came in with this incredibly restrained point counterpoint for the viewing. And so I have to say, there's a bit of a temple feeling to me, the way it progresses between this first set of paintings, the second set of paintings, and then this long altarpiece in the middle. I find it to be a very satisfying viewing experience to just go in there and wander around and contemplate and walk back and forth, because I think part of it is, even though a lot of your images are entropy and chaos and street detritus and construction site detritus, there's still a quality of things being made into these small icons, straight in this rhythm structure.
In the photographs or the paintings?
In the photographs.
Yeah.
But because there were these tall, these tall paintings, these tall stained glasses on the way in, what I'm fascinated with is this is a completely contemporary space. It's 17 feet long, 14 feet high, 11 feet wide. It's white. The canvases are white with these jewel blocks on them. The photographic paper is white with these squares, across them. But there's some sort of progression and reverence in how the room feels, just completely different than what I anticipated it to feel like. I like it.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I know I wanted to do vertical format paintings because the ceilings are pretty high there. Mm-hmm. And I know we talked about, the photographs also being vertically oriented, but you had the great idea of running them across as a kind of counterpoint to the verticality of the paintings. And I thought that worked really well. And I like how you can move around the room, and you can see one thing at a time, or you can take in the whole show at a glance, because it's not a huge room. So
no, it's our smallest gallery.
Yeah.
It's the old ladies' powder room in the Union Railroad Station. For those of you who haven't yet, in addition to showing what I find very dynamic and exciting and varied contemporary art, we are actually in 100-plus-year-old building that has been adaptive use of a historic structure. So there's a fun way each gallery has its own personality as you go through the Brattleboro Museum. You talked about the transient and the fleeting, and then the substantial and the solid to me at one point. And you had wanted to share a quote with our audience about those.
Yeah, well, there was at some point over the summer, I came across this quote by Charles Baudelaire that's from an essay, The Painter of Modern Life, and I thought it was interesting in terms of the show and in terms of my work. And it's just a sentence from the essay, and it's modernity is the transient, the fleeting, the contingent. It is one half of art, the other half being the eternal and the immovable. And I like that because it sets up a kind of opposition between these two aspects of life, but also in my mind, painting with its history and geometric painting specifically, has this. It just moves in this in this lane of talking about the eternal, talking about Platonic spaces, sacred geometry, and I realized that I just had an ambivalence about all that, I guess you would say, and the street photography was a kind of counterpoint to that. And because I was, the streets of New York City you are just so, oh God, I mean, there's beauty, but there's banality all mixed together, and it's just a jumble, right? You never know what you're going to see, and it's ephemeral, and it's disappearing. I think that's another element in my photography, is just this disappearing New York, which a lot of photographers, a lot of people have documented, and it's nothing. It's not a new thing, but it's just something that if you're here long enough, you see things disappear, and there's a melancholy feeling about that. And then the paintings, with the history of the eternal. I mean, Baudelaire's, he talks about spirituality and the eternal, and he's very comfortable throwing those terms around, as if we know exactly what he's talking about. But it was clearly in the air at that time, and something that you could talk about easily. But I'm moved by great art. I'm moved by things that are that have that sense of not timelessness. I mean, because that's but just I guess a kind of harmony, a kind of beauty, that takes you to a different place. And I think that's that idea of being transported is really important. And in the photographs, I think about, by the process of seeing something and framing it, in my mind, I'm taking something that could be incredibly mundane or incredibly banal, and actually shifting it, by the frame into something that is that has a kind of order to it. So yeah, it's the balance between, how much order, too much order, not enough order, so back and forth between those extremes for me. That's how my mind works.
Too much order, there's too much order, I think, and there's not that spark of spontaneity, and then too much chaos, and there's not that place where you actually can see, because it's too chaotic.
Yeah, just the right amount of distortion is wonderful.
Well, we all need a little surprise, a little mystery, a little magic in our viewing lives. A little magic. Yeah. That's what I always count on artists for doing for me. I think one of the great joys of my career is the artists that I've worked with, and the surprise and the joy and the magic they've made, even if it's the that it's coming from a very profound place, and I might be in tears over something because it is difficult material. There's the alchemy of the aesthetic experience where it's all transformed somehow in a wonderful way. So I thank you for bringing that to us in your exhibition at the Brattleboro Museum and Art Center through October 11th. For all of you who have not gotten up here, please do. I'm sure somewhere there's a slide that says www.brattleboromuseum.org out there. And you can follow us on Instagram and all those hashtaggy things that I don't actually know of ours. But at this point, I am wondering if one of my colleagues can inform us if there are any questions from the audience or anything you want probed deeper.
Great. Thank you both so much. It was really wonderful listening to you talk about this exhibit. Working in the museum every day, I really enjoy visiting Erick's show and sitting in there. I find it very restorative to be in that space. So personally grateful to both of you, and we're going to get to Q&A. I have a question before we jump in. Erick, I was wondering if you could share a little bit about the new work behind you and your thinking about that piece.
Sure. Yeah, I'm doing a few new things, and they're again like balance. I mean, there's 4 polygons here, and but I've just divided them into 3 and 4 sections, and there's a different feeling. The other ones, the other polygons set at a more stable grid-like structure, and this is starting to radiate in different ways, and but it's the same basic idea. So it's a new, I don't know if it's a new direction. It might be a boomlet where I do a few of those and see where it goes. I'm always working on new ideas, and they start out as drawings, and then I do small color studies, and then I do small paintings, and then bigger paintings. So it'll go through a process, to see how far it'll go. But,
so a lot more illusion in those, like you're falling off edges, that they're on different planes just by how they come together.
That's right. Yeah. And they start to pull apart. The shapes have a little more independence from each other, and yet they're still within that polygonal structure. So, I feel like there's a lot of possibilities in the way I'm working now. So it is, restrained and restricted in some ways, but that creates freedom. So I like that.
Inside and outside of the guardrails.
That's right. That's right. You need the guardrails there just to know when you've gone off the road, So.
Okay.
Okay.
We have another question. This person asks, do you make watercolor paintings?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with watercolor and gouache over the years, and I have worked with that medium quite a bit. The thing that's different in terms of the way I'm working now is that watercolor can there's different ways to do it, but I find that I'm actually doing oil paint on paper right now, and Mara has seen some of those.
I love these. Can you show one to everybody? Can you pick one up?
It'd take me a second. Yeah, let me get one. Sure.
So you're interesting that somebody's asking about watercolor or gouache, water-based mediums. Erick has discovered a paper that's designed to take oil paint so that it doesn't get that bleeding and blotting thing that would sort of ruin the edge of the illusion. And whatever he's doing with these in person, I cannot tell you how the color sings.
Yeah.
Is on this paper. It's just,
yeah.
It takes them to, they're smaller format than the big paintings. Big paintings, robust paintings. But there is some magic that's happening, some alchemy between the oil paint and this paper, and how much light through there, it's like a little aria in one
Yeah.
small painting. I'm just really, really, really hoping he finishes a body of those words so I can get my hands on one.
It's Arch's oil painting paper. That's there's nothing, you can get it anywhere where they sell good paper, but it's wonderful. You don't have to prepare it at all. And so anyway, the oil paint goes down, pretty similar to the way it works on canvas, and that's what I'm interested in right now. But I've done watercolor for a lot, for studies and things.
Great, thank you. We have a few more questions. This person asks, in the new paintings, all the polygons in the paintings touch, almost as if they are kissing. They seem comfortable and well-behaved, happy in this tight, enclosed space together. Is touch something you think about much?
Yeah. Well, there's different kinds of touch. There's the shapes that are touching, but then there's also the implied physicality of the making of them. So I'm touching it. I'm literally touching the surfaces, and there's the idea of touching and intimacy. I think that the way for the works that are in the show, I was thinking about this idea of irregular polygons, meaning not each one is actually different. So the idea that they're not going to fit together perfectly, but that they are going to touch, their edges will share some points of contact, and that so there'll be a tension, between the idea that they're independent and unique as a shape and a colored shape, but also that they'll be part of a group, and that there'll be hopefully a kind of harmony that can develop from their points of contact and the maintenance of the overall grid configuration. That's a long-winded way of putting it, but
That's great. We have another question. If you could talk about how you use color and juxtapose color.
Yeah, well, I mean, the easy thing for me to say is that I use color intuitively, and in that sense, I don't have a system. I don't have a kind of rational way of going at it. I do a very simple thing, which is, I just will tend to differentiate the shapes using warm colors or cool colors. And that, but not always, sometimes it'll be, like a blue painting, or it'll be, it'll be a more of a monochrome type of arrangement. But it's in these works, I mean, the challenging thing that I gave myself was to not just use a color, but to actually make them like a hybrid color or a woven color. And so, it might read as a certain color from far away, but as you get closer, you start to notice, oh, there's some green there, there's some red, there's some yellow, there's other things going on. And so I guess it's a way of just slowing down the read of the painting, and also just creating more complicated combinations, because I'm not using, really thick impastoed paint, like a Gerhard Richter style of abstraction is more like, really thick, different pigments getting dragged across. And I'm more like glazing my colors. But then when I create the striations, then it's not like a simple glaze. It's more of they're separating out into lines. Then you can see, okay, there's that blue, there's that green, there's that red. So it's just my way of working that I've evolved, and I'm interested in just pushing that continually farther and see where it goes.
I was wondering, related to that color question, if you, in those polygons that look like one color from far away and then are actually many colors close up, do you plan the one color, the local color that you want people to see from the beginning, or do you kind of layer the colors and see what builds up over time?
Yeah, I mean, I paint one polygon at a time, and then it becomes like a puzzle, you know, a bunch of puzzle pieces that have to fit together. And that's the engaging part for me, is to just be responsive to what I see happening, and to you know, like many times, I mean, the thing about color, you know, being so subjective is that, you know, at the end of a day, I might feel really good about, you know, something I've done, and then the next day I come back and I look at it and I go like, you know, or a week later, you know, and there's a lot of that, you know, just dealing with the seductiveness of the color, or the kind of contrariness of my response to it, and then just continually working to create these harmonies and create these differences. I mean, sometimes you have to create some dissonance there to make it work, and sometimes, you know, you'll put some paint down and you'll be like, oh, this is really going to be bad, you know, and you know it's going to be bad, but then when you actually get done with that phase of it, you're like, that, you know, that was the thing that pushed the painting forward, or it took it to a new place. I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's like a guitar chord, you know, a guitar having one string out of tune, you know, and you're trying to get that sense of harmony, and you really just, you know, I'm tuning those colors to the point where I feel like, okay, now it's starting to really, you know, making a good harmonic statement, I guess.
Great.
Thank you. Another question, this person asks, where are you going from here? Perhaps choosing to work with no edges.
No edges, that meaning like a shaped canvas kind of thing, maybe, I guess. No edge, that sounds really out there. I think I need my edges, you know. I need them. I still committed to the rectangle. I was, you know, there's some really good painters who are using shape supports, and I admire their work, but I'm still working within the frame. So I feel like if I start working with shaped canvases, then I'm, you know, that requires a level of commitment to the shape, and I like to keep it more open for what I'm doing.
Great. And then this person asks, do you plan out your paintings? What is the balance between your plan and spontaneity?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, you know, I try to keep in my mind what I've done before, so I'm not just, you know, going over the same grooves, you know. But I will do a lot of drawing, and some on like quadrille paper, and I love to draw freehand, and you know, with different mediums, and just kind of just get loose with the ideas. But then eventually, you know, I'll want to tighten it up, you know, straighten out the edges, and get like a working drawing that I could scale up onto a canvas. And so that's a process, you know, like I was saying, I'll start small, I'll do studies, I'll do, you know, and the benefit of working that way is that I can evaluate, you know, how it feels as I'm going, and without, you know, overcommitting. And then if I feel like I've got something, you know, that's really worth pursuing, then I can, you know, then I commit to it, and I'll make a painting. I'll make a few paintings with maybe a similar format or a related composition. But I need to get the structure right before I start putting down the paint. So.
For everybody out there in audience land, and I think we had 25 or 26 of you tonight. Erick's studio is wonderful, but and very organized, I have to say. For all the studios I've ever been in, you're a very organized artist. But he has little sketchbooks. He's got, you know, graph paper pads. He's got large sketchbooks, and it comes from just geometries of shape. He might have in some. Others are notebooks that are color notation notebooks, and they're a lot, and they're meticulous. And then from there, you can see where he starts pulling up what are successful ideas, small to medium to larger. But it's those sketchbooks, I think, are a trove of where you could go to see how his ideas keep developing and then move on and then get solidified, and then how a new notion, a new shape might work their way in. Because there was a whole series of earlier in his career of where he was sweeping rectangles across with somehow a diagonal that got you down to the next layer, that moved you along, that had a very different structure, and his color sense was much more tonal than pure. So the career has moved along, and the ideas move, and then they begin to move into like something that feels very different than the first ones.
Yeah, and the notebooks are a good way for me to keep track of the evolution of the ideas, and also I cut out images from newspaper images, which can be amazing, and then but also just little notations that if you don't collect those, they disappear, so.
Yeah, I just thank you both. I just have one more question, and it's kind of more for Mara, but also for Eric. And I was wondering about that coda that you mentioned, the last painting on your way out of the exhibit. And it seems like that was kind of a surprise or a late stage addition. I was wondering if you could talk about the curatorial process there and how that came about.
Well, Eric had his, I issued the challenge. We worked in the studio a couple times, and he had the progression. Then we got in the space and we talked about it together. And like all artists, he brought extra paintings and extra photographs and extra everything, just so that spontaneity could happen in the space, because holding the space, a three-dimensional space, a viewing experience that somebody's moving through, is different than just putting one painting in one show and then moving, or having a painting in a home. But when you walk in, the progression of two large paintings, you move forward, another two large paintings that had this sort of stained glass wall effect, and then you had this, as I called it earlier, this sort of altarpiece, like it might have even opened up, because it was very, very horizontal line, almost edge to edge on the final wall. And that might have been enough, but when you turn around or came around the corner to leave, or if you just spun the way we would spin to go look at the rose window up in a cathedral, there's this blank wall. And then this became this one little intimate space. And because of the rhythm structures in Erick's work, I really did think of it as a coda. But I could also, if I hung it way up high on the wall, or Erick allowed me to do something like that way it would be more about my work than his work. It's always supposed to be about the artist's work. You could have made the allusion to a rose window if you had hung it up higher, but that much of an illusion, it's not something that served the work, but just having this little intimate breath moment as you left the show, I thought completed the experience.
Yeah, I agree, and it was also smaller, so it broke the pattern of the four big ones. So I like that.
That's lovely. It's just so great to hear about both of your processes, the artist process and the curator process, giving us a little window into your brains. So I really appreciate that tonight. Thank you.
The artist does all the hard work. I do all the fun.
Yeah.
So you have it.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I think, oh, we might have one more question. Let's see. Oh, just a comment. Wonderful conversation about the work. Thank you.
And you're very welcome, whoever you are out there in Wonderland.
From Sue Johnson.
Oh, well, of course.
That's my sister. She's an artist too. So.
Oh, that's great.
She is. I just met. She's my third native San Franciscan.
Right. Yes.
Yep. Absolutely.
And then we had another
That's
comment.
Great.
Thank you. So enlightening. from Ellen McCullough.
That's from our dear Ellen.
Wonderful.
See that one. Okay, well, thank you everyone who joined us. I wish we had all been together in person. I always feel that looking into each other's eyes and then looking at the work together and then pulling out in conversation is so wonderfully rewarding, but this is better than not talking about art at all because we can't get together. So
Absolutely. And I just want to, before we sign off, I wanted to let everyone know that there's a recording of tonight's event and will be available on our website in the next day or two at brattleboromuseum.org. And while you're there, you can check out recordings of other events that we've presented online over the past year and a half. And you'll find those under events and then video archive. And if you happen to be in the Brattleboro area, I highly encourage you to come to the museum and see Erick's exhibit in person. We're open Wednesday to Sunday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and admission is on a pay-as-you-wish basis. And finally, if you enjoyed tonight's program and would like to make a donation to support this type of free programming, we would be very grateful for that. You can do that at our website at brattleboromuseum.org/support. And I think that does it. So Erick and Mara, thank you again. It was a true pleasure. And everybody out there, stay safe and have a good evening.
have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye, Erick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.